So, what are you doing climbing on that chair like a silly puppy? What up, nerds? Welcome back to the Nerdy Narrative. My name is Leslie Smith, and today I want to talk about my reread of The Way of Kings by Brandon Sanderson. I have always been a person who will read a book, and if I love it, I will reread it and reread it and reread it and reread it and reread it. That's just how I operate. And then there's times that depending on where I am at in my own life, a book may not hit me the right way. So I'll put it down and then weeks, months, years later, pick it back up and try it again. And then there's been times that I've read a book, loved it, read it years later, and then hated it. Because as you get older and you make your way through life, you are going to experience things. Things are going to happen to you. And those experiences can change how you view things. So because of that, that's what makes rereading interesting. And then there's times that you have a book on your shelf and you read it 10 years ago, you know you loved it and it was a favorite and you just want to pull it down and get reacquainted with your old friends. What I have discovered with my reread of The Way of Kings is I missed so much the first time around. I mean, come on now, look at this chunker. There's no way you can read 1,000 pages and retain all of that information, right? Right. I read this book for the first time in April, and I know you're probably going, wait a minute, it's June. Why are you already rereading this book? Well, I'll tell you, when I read this book, it became my favorite book of all time. When I finished it, I literally seriously contemplated turning right back to the first page and starting over because I enjoyed it that much. By the time I got my hands on Words of Radiance, because right after this one I read Warbreaker, so when it came time to get my hands on Words of Radiance, that's when Michael Knipp, Christy Lewis, Ryan from Seeking Stories, Victoria from A Musical Bookworm, that's when they announced their Storm Along 2020, which is a reread of the Stormlight Archives, so that we're ready when Rhythm of War comes out later this year. And so what I wanted to do is I have a non-spoiler review on my channel. This one is going to just be me talking about what I've learned during my reread. This video is going to be full of spoilers. It is for people who have read The Way of Kings that want to come hear what I think about it and just have a discussion with me. See if you agree with some of the things that I'm seeing and what I'm thinking. Just remember, as of right now, I have not read any of the other Stormlight Archives books. So some of the questions I may have right now are answered in later books. So please don't spoil that for me in the comments by saying, well, this is because of blah, 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 dummy. Okay, I haven't read any further yet. I won't get there for a while because I'm gonna wait and read those books for the first time with the Storm Along 2020 group. So just keep that in mind. When I read it for the first time, the prologue didn't make a whole lot of sense to me. I knew it was there for a reason. It had meaning of some sort. It was just some pages I needed to read to get to chapter 1. During my reread, however, things started clicking into place and actually making sense. It's like Sanderson wrote that prologue because he knew we were going to love this book so much that we were going to read it and reread it and reread it for years to come. And it's like that prologue is a little homage to us rereaders because from the reread standpoint, it just meant so much more. I 100% stand by that prologue was written for rereaders. The first thing that I read in the prologue that I missed or it didn't really mean anything to me was when they mentioned the herald's blades, that they were weapons of power beyond shard blades. I did not take notice of that or realize there was a distinction between the herald blades and the shard blades. The first time I read it, I actually thought shard blades were possibly blades from the heralds, even though now it makes no sense because there was only like 12 heralds, but there were tons more Knights Radiant. And that's where that came from. So that was just plumb missed for me on that. With the reread, I have more question about the heralds. Like, who were they really? I mean, we meet them when they're basically quitting. So I don't have a high opinion of them. Like, why were they created? How did they come to be? Like, what are they exactly? Because when the 9 quit and left Talonel to suffer alone, rude, they said, well, they'll have the Radiant. And then I was like, who are the Radiants? Like, why were they created? And what were they for? And then they basically quit too, it sounds like. So then we move forward 4,500 years, and we have another prologue about Szeth, when he, as a Shin Truthless, is told to wear white by his masters and allow himself to be seen killing King Gavilar right after they signed the treaty between the Parshmen and the Alethi. Alethi. I'm so curious to know who orchestrated that and why. I don't know if they did that because they knew that the High Princes of Alethi battled the Parshmen, the Parshendi. Were they afraid of the Parshendi rising up? So that's why they killed the king of Alethi. Like, they wanted the Alethi and the Parshendi to battle each other so another third power could rise. And they were just maybe afraid of those two powerhouses. So they figured, I'm going to set them at each other's throats. So a lot of questions. Also, what is a Truthless? How did Szeth become one? Because he is a pretty powerful Joker. Like, he is able to lash himself. How is he able to create lashings? And he has a shard blade. How did he get that? I want to know more. I want to know his story. I hope we get it. I don't know if we do. Like I said, I've only read The Way of Kings, so I know we're thinking, read more, noob. But what was the black spear that Gavilar gave to Szeth when he was dying? Like, what was that? There was no mention of it glowing, so it wasn't infused with stormlight. So what is it? And talking about Gavilar's death, like, what are all these death samples that are at the beginning of the chapters? It's always something that someone says like a few seconds before they die. Like, what is the purpose of that? I mean, I'm sure it has to tie in somehow. I wonder if it is the Carbranthian king, and those are excerpts that they're taking from people that are dying in their hospitals or that they're killing, doing their experiments. I wonder if those are things that people are saying. Because, you know, I haven't reread that part yet, but I remember it from the first time I read that it came out that they were basically killing people to see what they would say at the time of death, because some of them were like speaking things that were kind of sounded like prophecies and such. Second prologue. Now we go 5 years later and we pick up with Caledon. Caledon is someone that you fall in love with immediately. He's very honorable, he's intelligent, he wants to save, and he cares about his men. And our first meeting with him, they're about to go to a skirmish between a couple of the high princes. Somebody was infringing on somebody else's turf and they were going to settle the dispute. Caledon has this thing where whenever a young man was brought into the army, Caledon would purchase that young man and bring him into his company. And they would protect that young man until they could actually teach him how to be a soldier. Caledon was just so different. He was not a leader who stood at the back. Caledon understood that in order to lead effectively, he needed to stand at the front. And that's what he did. He did his best to stand at the front of his men and fight with them and protect them the best that he could. So then we jump forward to like 8 months later, and suddenly Caledon is a slave and we don't know why. Tells another slave that he's in a cart with that he was made a slave because he killed a Light Eyes, which Light Eyes are people who are considered the nobility. If you had light colored eyes, you were, you know, the hierarchy of their society was built on the color of your eyes, which is crazy. And apparently if you were able to become a shard bearer by defeating someone who wore a plate or the armor or the sword, that it would change your eye color. I just think it's absolutely ridiculous that somebody is considered fit to rule because of their color of their eyes. I do think we're going to learn more about that later in the series of books. I haven't learned enough to satisfy me yet. But as Caledon is telling the guy that he became a slave because he killed a Light Eyes, and he was like, well, how is that a problem? He said, well, the problem is the one that I didn't kill. So there's a story there, and we're going to get into that later. So you can imagine, when we first met Caledon, he was a squadron leader. He was called Caledon Stormblessed. His men loved him, and suddenly he's a slave. And so you can imagine when you are taken from such a prestigious position in society and you're now a slave, well, obviously he is very upset. He's depressed, isn't sure of who he is anymore. I mean, he's just been beaten, he's underfed. I mean, he's just miserable. He's tried many times to escape, but he's got the slave brand on his forehead and another one that means he's dangerous. Even though he did successfully get away, as soon as somebody saw that brand, he was captured. So curiously enough, Caledon starts to become aware that a Windspren has really targeted him. And then she's like playing pranks on him, and then he starts thinking about it. He's like, wait a minute, she's been around for a long time because I remember seeing her, which is unusual. The different types of Spren do different things. They come out with different emotions. Somebody would win a battle and Glory Spren would come out. They take an injury if it rots. You know, you got Rot Spren. This one particular one was a Wind Spren, and they might come around and target you for pranks for a bit, but then they usually go on about their way. But this one wasn't leaving Caledon. And to make it even more curious, this Windspren takes the shape of a little female and begins to talk to Caledon. And we find out her name it's like Sylphrina. She goes by Syl for short. And even she herself isn't quite sure how it is that she's been able to evolve to where she can change her shape like this and actually have a conversation with Caledon. And you can tell she doesn't really understand a lot of things like sarcasm and stuff like that. She's just noticed that Caledon's different. Like, she says, you were different. You're different now. You used to be so different when I watched you fighting. And that sinks into Caledon. He's like, wow, she's been with me since I was in the army. That we're gonna leave off with Caledon there. The next character I want to talk about is Shaylen. I don't like Shaylen. I don't trust her. I never did. And even though in my reread, I know what's going to happen later in the book that kind of solidifies how I felt about her initially. But in my first reading of The Way of Kings, I didn't like her. I didn't trust her. I didn't really know why. I mean, there was times when I would read things about her that kind of sway my thoughts that I thought, well, it's okay. She's okay. I shouldn't feel distrustful of her. One of the interesting things about the world, about Roshar that I learned is the women keep their left hands covered once they reach a certain age. And depending on their station, they may either just wear a glove or it's just completely covered by their sleeve, like buttoned up in a sleeve. And I don't know why they do that. Like, in The Way of Kings, it never really lays that out for me, why they cover their safe hand. It seems a pain in the tail. I can't imagine trying to get through life with an arm covered. I mean, it basically makes it useless. So I don't understand that. But that's okay. I don't have to understand it, but I can appreciate that Brandon Sanderson does things like that make it interesting, make me think about it. It's like he just builds his own culture, and I have to appreciate that. So also in Shaylen's chapters, we learn about the money system, which are the spears. And the different spears have different types of gems in them and sizes. And they can infuse these spears with Stormlight, which that's where they get their value. The Stormlight does fade over time, but you can put them outside in a high storm and it will recharge them, so to speak. Shaylen is just surrounded by learning. She's angling to be accepted by Gavilar's daughter, Jasna, the princess. She is a very well-renowned scholar, but she's a pagan because she doesn't support their belief system. So she kind of has a little bit of a bad reputation there, but even so, lots of young women would like to be her ward and learn under her because while it is a very prestigious position for the learning alone, it also can help raise their station in life, make sure they make a better match when they get married, be afforded more opportunity. So through Shaylen, we also start getting a lot of exposure to the belief system and how the Ardents teach them about the different callings and how important it is to choose one's calling. The Ardents believe that choosing a good profession and working really hard at it was the best way to ensure good placement in the afterlife. So they put a lot of stock in choosing a calling. And Shaylen chose natural history because she wants to be a scholar. We also learn that Shaylen's father has died, and her brothers are trying to keep it a secret because he was in a lot of debt. And if the other houses learned that Shaylen's father was dead, House Devar would just be, it would be over. It would be dissolved and consumed by the other houses. Shaylen and her brothers could be assassinated or made slaves. So they have this plan hatched where Shaylen is going to go become a ward of Jasnah. Shaylen is going to steal Jasnah's soulcaster. And the soulcaster was a sort of gemmed gauntlet sort of sounding thing. And different soulcasters do different things. The one that Jasnah has, she could change things. Like what I've read so far, she took her soulcaster and turned a boulder into smoke. That the boulder had fallen down in one of the buildings for the King of Kharbranth, and his granddaughter was trapped behind it. And Jasnah was able to use this contraption to turn it to smoke. Shaylen's father had a soulcaster that was loaned to him by some shady characters, and he would use this to make things on their land in order to make money, like mining nodes and stuff that they could mine, sell for money, and keep his household going. Well, it turns out that the day that her father died, the soulcaster broke. And the one that she has looks exactly like Jasnah's, so she's hoping to swap them. I honestly just can't tell you what it was that I didn't like about Shaylen the first time I read the book. And by the time I finished The Way of Kings the first time, I didn't like her at the end. I almost liked her a couple times though. There were a couple times I found myself actually enjoying some of her development, but here I am back at the beginning again, and I'm just not a fan. I just can't really put it into words why. So moving on to Dalinar Kholin. I love him. When I read the book the first time, his sections just felt reverent. I just really enjoyed his character development. He is an awesome, awesome character. I love his character. He has so much honor, and he has the greatest undertaking of all of them. And just reading about it again, where he's suffering from visions every time there's a high storm. High storms are storms that rage across this world, and they're super bad storms. You don't want to be caught outside in one. Like, you have a very small chance of surviving unless you're able to find cover. Here lately, when a high storm hits, he starts having visions. He just keeps hearing a voice saying, unite them, unite them. And he knows that it means the High Princes of Alethi. And at first I didn't really understand, because I was like, aren't they all under one king? And then I read a passage that it just didn't sink in its importance the first time I read the book. In it, Dalinar is saying all of the High Princes pay lip service to the king, but that's all it is, lip service. The Shattered Plains, where they are out fighting against the Parshendi, is dividing the kingdom. When King Gavilar was killed by Zeph, the High Princes formed what is called the Vengeance Pact. And this pact, the Alethi High Princes vowed to seek retribution upon the Parshendi. And what's happened is they've been out here for like 5 or 6 years. They will just as soon fight each other as they will the Parshendi. It's insane. It's ridiculous. When I say fight the Parshendi, I don't mean they like mount assaults or anything like that. I mean, they all race to get to these big shelled creatures. If you kill it and cut out its heart, it's a huge gem heart that's like a bunch of wealth. So that's all they're doing. They're not actually fighting each other except for over these shell creatures. If you're trying to seek retribution, why aren't they taking the fight to the Parshendi? Dalinar, who was is called the Blackthorn. He is brother to Gavilar, the slain king, uncle to the current king. He's known as the greatest general warrior ever. But the problem is, he's having these visions where the voice is saying, unite them, the Everstorm comes. All of his peers are seeing it as a weakness. They think he's going mad, like he's just old and just losing his touch. Dalinar is kind of wondering it himself. He's doubting himself. He knows something's up because when his brother, the king, was murdered, there was a board with a message written on it. And it said, brother, you must find the most important things to say. And that is a quote from a book called The Way of Kings. So Dalinar has had this book read to him many, many times, trying to discern what that means. It's not just written out, like this is what this means. So he's trying to infer what it is that it means, what message Gavilar was trying to give to him. And even though I have read this book once through already, it is just as entertaining and interesting, if not more so, the second time around. And I really urge you, if you've only read this book once, read it again, because everything has so much more meaning. When I began the reread, I was like, okay, I'm gonna pick up on all of the little crumbs that Sanderson was putting out there for stuff that's gonna happen later. And while that is true, what I wasn't expecting is all of the stuff that I missed or things that I remembered, but the meanings have changed. I mean, I got my Nancy Drew hat on because I'm also looking for more information that might help me figure out who is behind all of this. Who really killed King Gavilar and why? What is the purpose behind it? I don't know, guys. I don't know. But I'm about a quarter of the way through the book. That's where I'm at. That's where I'm going to leave off with you for now. If by some crazy reason you have not heard of the Stormalong 2020 read along, I'm going to put all of the information in the description box below for you so you can join in. It is not too late. The hosts have already had one live show. They had it on June 4th where they played Mad Libs with us. It was so much fun. And tonight is the first one where we're all going to come together and talk about reading the first 17 chapters of The Way of Kings. It's just been a real treat. Following the character development for Caledon, oh man, that was just my favorite thing of The Way of Kings was Caledon's character development. I am enjoying every step of that journey again. I'm enjoying seeing all of the things that didn't mean anything the first time I read it, what they mean now, the nods to things that are going to happen to come, and then all of the new little things that I'm starting to pick up. I'm like, wonder what this means. I hope you enjoyed this deep dive. If you did, please let me know below. I do plan to keep this going as I make my way through the Stormlight archives. I would love to have you with me on this journey. Have a fantastic rest of your day, and I'll see you soon.